In this video, I will explain the action characteristic equivalence principle of action-reaction theory. The action characteristic equivalence principle states that some action is performed if and only if some characteristic is possessed. The first part, if some action is performed, then some characteristic is possessed, shows that any performed action moves something, and therefore that something that is moved is something that is not an action. It must be a characteristic. Therefore, a characteristic is possessed. The second part, if some characteristic is possessed, then some action is performed, is evident in the fact that if some characteristic is possessed, an action is always being performed, such as you analyzing the characteristic. Therefore, an action is performed. The action characteristic equivalence principle thus states that the statement "some action is performed" is logically equivalent to "some characteristic is possessed." This is seen in the fact that there is always some action being performed, such as the molecules in the table vibrating, and that there is always some characteristic being possessed, such as yourself. So both statements are always true, and if they are both always true, then they are logically equivalent by definition. Since the statements are logically equivalent, we can always in practice substitute a characteristic for an action, or an action for a characteristic, without changing truth value. This hence allows us to speak about actions in terms of characteristics, and it allows us to speak about characteristics in terms of actions. For example, standing guard is an action, but can be expressed using characteristics, such as a location where standing guard is occurring, and a reason about why standing guard is being performed, and of what the consequences are of this action. Another example is blueness, which is a characteristic, but can be expressed through actions, such as the electromagnetic activity that gives blue light its unique frequency. The action characteristic equivalence principle. Some action is performed if and only if some characteristic is possessed.